Hi, I'm Ellen. My parents ignored me on my birthday, no calls, no texts, not even a card. I thought maybe they'd just forgotten, but when I posted the deed to my first house, they suddenly remembered I existed. The compliments, the fake pride, it all came flooding in. But that was just the beginning, because behind the smiles, they were already planning something much worse. How far would a family go when they think they're entitled to everything you built? The evening air was crisp as I pushed open the door to my apartment, the quietness wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. February 12th, my 33rd birthday, and all I had to show for it was a microwave meal and a bottle of cheap wine. I wasn't asking for a parade. A call, a message, a lousy voicemail would have been enough. I kicked off my heels and made my way into the tiny kitchen, setting the flimsy plastic bag on the counter. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence while I plated my dinner. I glanced at my phone on the kitchen island, willing it to light up with something, anything. But no, just a string of notifications from colleagues and a distant friend from college, the kind that posts a happy birthday graphic once a year out of politeness. Nothing from them. I ate mechanically, each bite tasting more like regret than food. I kept refreshing my messages like some desperate teenager waiting for validation that wasn't coming. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at the clock. 8, 9, 10. By 10:30, it was impossible to deny the truth they weren't going to call. The memories came rushing back without warning. My 5th birthday, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with a frosting-smeared grin because Dad had let me lick the spoon. My 10th birthday, when Mom bought a store-bought cake but still lit 10 candles with trembling hands, whispering wishes into the dark kitchen. My 16th, the keys to a battered old Honda pressed into my palm as Israel sulked in the background. They used to care. Or maybe I was just convenient to care about back then. I stared at the black screen of my phone as if it owed me an explanation. I kept asking myself, how did it get like this? When did growing up turn me into an afterthought? I wasn't some perfect daughter, sure. I didn't show up at every barbecue. I didn't pretend to be interested in Facebook drama or who won Friday night poker games. But I was steady. I was always there when it mattered. Apparently, that didn't matter anymore. The emptiness settled deep into my bones, heavy and stubborn. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Not because I was strong, but because it just wasn't surprising anymore. The slow erosion of care over years didn't shock me now. It exhausted me. Sometime close to midnight, I poured myself a second glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out over the quiet Charlotte streets. I thought about texting them some weak, pitiful message about how today had felt. But something inside me, something jagged and electric, whispered no. If my presence wasn't important enough to acknowledge, then my absence needed to be louder. I didn't have a plan yet. But tomorrow, I would make sure they noticed what they chose to ignore. Morning crept in like a slow tide, gray and muted. I hadn't really slept, just drifted between dreams that dissolved into the ceiling fan's dull hum. When the first light smeared itself across the skyline, I threw off the covers. There was no grand plan, just a brittle need clawing at my chest. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt ambition, and sat at the table with my phone. No fresh messages, no late apologies. The silence was now a cement wall between us. Maybe it always had been. Without allowing myself time to overthink, I opened the photo gallery. A few months ago, I had snapped a picture of the deed to my house, neat official mine. I hadn't shared it then because celebrating felt like bragging. Now it felt like survival. I posted the photo. No captions, no flashy emojis, just the cold, black and white proof of my existence. I hit share before the self-doubt could claw me back. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. My coworkers reacted first heart emojis. Congrats, Ellen, you earned it. Little flashes of kindness I hadn't expected warmed the edges of my mood. Friends from college chimed in too, some I hadn't heard from in years. For a brief, foolish moment, I let myself believe today might be different. Then, about 2 hours later, the notifications started rolling in, ones I didn't expect, ones that made my stomach clench. Howard liked the post. Myra left a heart emoji. Israel commented, "Proud of you, sis," like he hadn't spent the last 3 years pretending I didn't exist unless he needed something. It was all so public, performative. I stared at their names on the screen, feeling the bitter taste of recognition settle under my tongue. Where were these hearts when I graduated law school without anyone in the audience? Where was the proud of you when I bought this house after years of overtime, after holidays spent alone because work was easier to stomach than awkward family dinners? Now, suddenly, I was worth noticing, worth clapping for. Now, when there was something tangible to take pride in by association. I put the phone face down on the table and pressed my palms against the cool surface, grounding myself. It would have been so easy to reply, to reach back out, to pretend the slate was clean just because they were throwing me a few cheap words like scraps to a dog. But deep down, the truth gnawed at me. Genuine love doesn't show up only when there's a camera flash or a crowd to impress. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. I would just watch, observe, let them show me exactly who they were. The days that followed moved quietly. I went through the motions commuting, answering emails, sitting through meetings, but beneath it all, something restless stirred. I knew better than to trust the sudden flood of affection. Patterns don't change just because they put on a new mask. On the morning of February 14th, my phone buzzed before my alarm. I blinked at the screen. A message from Howard. "Morning, sweetheart. Thinking maybe we should catch up? Lunch on us?" A minute later, Myra's text arrived. "We miss you, Ellen. It's been too long. How about a nice family lunch?" Then Israel. "Yo, sis, let's hang. We need some quality fam time." It would have been funny if it weren't so transparent. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet them at a small diner just outside town neutral ground. The next afternoon, I got there early and took a booth by the window. A tired-looking waitress dropped off a menu and a glass of water. I tapped my fingers on the table, waiting. When they arrived, Howard, Myra, Israel, and Aileen, trailing behind their smiles, were too wide, too forced. We ordered and made awkward small talk about weather and traffic. Then came the compliments, laid on thick. "You're doing amazing, Ellen," Howard said, clapping my back with a little too much force. "Your house must be gorgeous," Myra added brightly, stirring her iced tea too fast. Aileen leaned closer, voice syrupy. "Big houses can feel lonely though, right? Especially when it's just you." She let the words hang there, baiting me. I smiled, even as the walls pressed in. Israel took a long sip of Coke and added, "Me and Aileen are kind of between places. Nothing big, you know how it is. Maybe we could crash at your place? Just for a little while." Howard jumped in like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Honestly, sweetheart, your mom and I were thinking, our old place is getting tough to maintain. My back's been killing me. Maybe we could move in for a bit too. Family bonding and all that." They smiled like they were offering me a gift, not a burden. I placed my fork down carefully, my hunger gone. Every instinct screamed to tear through their lies, to expose the truth they were trying so hard to dress up. But I didn't. Instead, I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and smiled just as sweetly. "I'll think about it," I said, voice steady and calm. But inside, the decision was already made. The drive home after lunch blurred into brake lights and white lines. I gripped the steering wheel too tightly, replaying their words, dissecting every fake smile and loaded comment. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the decision was set, heavy and sure in my chest. That evening, after a long shower and hours staring blankly at the TV, I typed out a message. "I've thought about it," I wrote carefully. "I need this space for myself. I hope you understand. No apologies, no explanations, just the truth, simple and final." I hit send, set the phone face down, and refused to let guilt creep in. For a few blissful hours, the silence held. Then, like slow leaks in a sinking ship, the backlash started. First came the passive-aggressive Facebook posts. "Some people forget who loved them first," Myra wrote, pairing it with a blurry photo from a long-forgotten family barbecue. Minutes later, Howard added his own jab. "When money talks, family walks." Aileen didn't bother with subtlety. Some folks only remember blood when it's convenient. I stared at the screen, feeling the slow, familiar sting of old wounds reopening. I hadn't even replied, and already they were rewriting the story with me cast as the villain. By morning, my inbox buzzed with messages. "Hey, Ellen, everything okay? Your mom seemed pretty upset yesterday," a neighbor texted. Another from a distant family friend read, "Heard some stuff. Hope you're not letting success get to your head." Success. As if scraping together enough to buy a modest home after years of work was something to be ashamed of. Rumors spread like weeds, quick, messy, impossible to contain. I realized this wasn't just about me refusing them a place to stay. It was about control, about punishing me for stepping out of reach. The urge to respond, to defend myself, burned hot. It would have been easy to post my side, to lay out the truth for everyone to see, but I didn't. Instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and typed, "Silence isn't surrender, it's strategy." They wanted a reaction. They wanted me tangled back in their narrative. But I wasn't that desperate girl anymore, begging to be understood. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. When the time came, I'd be ready. The tension that had been simmering finally found its moment to boil over. It started with a call from Israel late one afternoon while I was at my office, buried in paperwork. His voice was unusually smooth, casual, too casual. "Hey, Ellen, you got a minute? Thought maybe we could, clear the air," he said. Something in me knew better, but I agreed. We arranged to meet the next evening at my house. When I opened the door, it wasn't just Israel standing there. Howard and Myra flanked him, their faces pulled into tight, practiced smiles. I stepped aside, letting them in, keeping my own expression as neutral as stone. We settled around the dining room table, the same table I'd dreamed about having for years, solid oak, earned with long nights and early mornings. Israel didn't waste time. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, "we've been talking, and we think it's only fair you share this with the family." I blinked once, slowly. "Share what exactly?" He gestured broadly at the house. "This, the house. Look, Mom and Dad sacrificed a lot for you growing up. Private school, activities, all that. I mean, isn't it just right that now you help them out?" Myra chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Baby, it's not about taking anything from you. It's about families sticking together." Howard nodded solemnly. "You wouldn't have gotten here without us." The nerve, the sheer audacity. I folded my hands calmly on the table. "I respect the sacrifices you made," I said, voice steady. "But sacrifices done out of love don't come with a bill. Love doesn't demand interest payments decades later." Israel scoffed. "Come on, Ellen. Don't act like you did all this alone. You owe it to us." "I owe you respect," I said firmly. "I owe you love. I don't owe you property." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. That's when Myra's face crumpled, tears springing up instantly. It was the same old tactic: cry first, blame later. "I can't believe how selfish you've become," she sobbed. Howard's jaw tightened. "All that education turned you cold." Israel leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "You really want to do this? Cut yourself off from your family over a house?" I didn't flinch. I stood up slowly, steadying myself with the edge of the table. If this is what family looks like, maybe being alone isn't the worst thing. They stared at me, stunned, as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't waver. The house felt too still after they left, like the air itself was holding its breath. I kept myself busy, answering work emails, folding laundry, doing anything to push away the gnawing feeling that this wasn't over. 2 days later, it arrived, a thick envelope stuffed into my mailbox, no return address. My gut clenched the moment I saw it. Inside was a letter stamped with what looked like a law office's logo, though something about it felt off. The wording was sloppy, the threats exaggerated. It accused me of neglecting familial duties and cited something called filial responsibility laws, demanding I provide financial support and housing to my parents. It was a cheap shot, and a stupid one. I took a picture of the letter and immediately sent it to Jennifer, my lawyer. I didn't even bother calling first, she knew the whole mess already. By evening, her response buzzed on my phone. "No enforceable filial responsibility law in North Carolina that applies to adult children providing housing," she wrote. "This is a bluff, a bad one." I exhaled slowly, feeling both furious and vindicated. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd bulldozed it. They thought they could scare me into submission with fake legal threats, like I was some naive kid who didn't know her rights. Big mistake. The next morning, under Jennifer's guidance, I had a cease and desist letter formally sent to Howard, Myra, and Israel. It was crisp, professional, and left no room for misunderstanding. Any further harassment, slander, or threats would result in immediate legal action. The silence that followed was eerie, until, of course, the emotional bombs started dropping. Myra's voice messages arrived first, a string of sniffles and desperate pleas. "Ellen, please don't do this to us. We're family. Blood's thicker than contracts. We just want to be close to you." Howard's tone was less syrupy, clipped, and bitter. "You're choosing money over blood. Hope it keeps you warm when you're old and alone." And Israel? A single text, cold and simple. "Hope you enjoy that house, traitor." I played the messages once, then deleted them all. I didn't even reply. They thought threats could shake me. They forgot I built my life on surviving storms. The storm I had braced for came roaring in by the 1st of March. It started with a few pointed Facebook posts. Myra shared a Bible verse about children who forget their parents' sacrifices, tagging nearly every family friend, church acquaintance, and distant cousin she could. Howard wasn't as poetic. His post read, "It's funny how money changes people." Sad, really. They didn't mention my name, of course. They didn't have to. Within hours, I started getting side-eyed texts. "Hey, just checking in, heard some things. Hope everything's okay. Miss seeing you around, Ellen." It didn't stop there. Israel and Aileen took it offline, whispering in community spaces, spreading half-truths twisted into full-blown character assassinations. According to their version, I had abandoned my poor aging parents, turned my back on my family after getting rich and forgetting where I came from. It was calculated, vicious, and almost impressive in its audacity. Almost. Because this time, I didn't just sit back and weather it. I chose to act. I took a quiet afternoon to gather my receipts, literal and figurative, screenshots of messages, timestamps of calls I made that went unanswered, years of bank statements showing how I supported myself through college, how not a dime of family money funded my education or my house. Then I posted. One post. No rage, no insults. Just a photo of the deed to my house, a scanned copy of my law school acceptance letter, unpaid loans still listed, and a caption, "Truth doesn't need decorations. Documents don't lie." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. The ripple effect was immediate. Some of the people who had so eagerly liked my parents' passive-aggressive posts now quietly unliked them. A few sent private messages apologizing for jumping to conclusions. And a handful, a precious, stubborn handful, posted public support for me. "Proud of you, Ellen. Some people can't handle someone breaking the cycle and succeeding. Stay strong. You did this yourself. Don't let anyone steal that from you." It didn't erase the sting of betrayal. Nothing could. But it reminded me, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. Howard and Myra raged silently, posting cryptic quotes about ingratitude and family shame. But it didn't matter anymore. I unfriended and blocked them all. Israel, Aileen, Myra, Howard. Gone from my social media, gone from my phone. And then, for the first time, I posted something just for me. Love without respect is manipulation. I choose peace. I hit send without a second thought. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared to walk alone. The days after cutting ties felt eerily calm, like the eye of a hurricane where everything held its breath. But I knew better than to believe it was over. The real work was just beginning. By March 5th, with the help of Jennifer, my attorney, I filed for a restraining order against Howard, Israel, and Aileen. Their public smears, their coordinated harassment both online and offline, it all stacked up into a case strong enough to make even the most cynical judge take notice. Simultaneously, I contacted my homeowner association. They had strict bylaws against harassment within the community, and once they reviewed the evidence, they issued formal warnings to Howard and Israel, banning them from using any shared channels to spread their narrative. The papers were served on a cool Thursday morning. Howard's rage barely simmered beneath the surface as he received the notice, according to the process server's report. Israel reportedly tried to tear his copy in half right there on the sidewalk, But the real consequences unraveled slower, and they cut deeper. Howard and Israel's antics, once only whispered about, now stood exposed under public scrutiny. Community respect, the social currency they clung to so desperately, drained from them like sand through fingers. Aileen wasn't spared either. Her part-time job at a boutique downtown took a hit when her employer, a friend of mine from college, learned about her role in the slander campaign. They couldn't afford the bad press, and just like that, her hours were cut indefinitely. I didn't post about any of it. I didn't brag. I didn't need to. My victory wasn't loud. It was silent, steady, like a fortress finally sealed from invaders. The night the restraining orders went into full effect, I poured a glass of wine and stood by my living room window, looking out at the lake glittering under the moonlight. On the far wall, above my fireplace, hung the deed to my house framed simply but powerfully. It wasn't about the bricks or the mortgage. It was about the life I built, the battles I fought, the dignity I refused to sell for cheap affection. I knew healing wouldn't happen overnight. The cracks they left inside me wouldn't vanish with a few legal victories. But I wasn't bleeding anymore. I wasn't chasing approval with open hands and a desperate heart. I was building something stronger, something they couldn't reach, couldn't tarnish, couldn't steal. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I was free. And freedom, I realized, was worth every scar I carried. March 20th, 2025 arrived quietly. 10 days had passed since the last court papers were signed and filed. 10 days since the final ties to old pain were legally and emotionally cut. That morning, I sat on my back porch, wrapped in a loose blanket, coffee warm between my hands. The lake shimmered under the hesitant spring sun. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel heavy. It felt open. The past still brushed against my thoughts, the harsh words, the cold silences, the long nights of wondering why love could wound so deeply. But I didn't shy away anymore. I faced it, not to relive it, but to acknowledge it as just a chapter, not the whole story. Later that week, an old colleague invited me to dinner. Normally, I would have declined, retreating into solitude. But something in me stirred. Say yes. So I did. The night was simple laughter, easy conversation, no hidden jabs or quiet contests. Just people choosing kindness without strings attached. At one point, laughing over a story about a runaway grocery cart, I realized I was laughing fully, without caution, without wondering if I belonged. It hit me. Family isn't built on blood alone. It's built on choice, on mutual respect freely given. In the weeks that followed, I poured energy into something that mattered, starting a small scholarship fund for young women from underprivileged backgrounds, women fighting battles I once knew too well. It wasn't much at first, but it was real. It was forward. It was mine. Each step, signing papers, setting goals, made me feel lighter, more connected to the girl I once was, the one who dreamed of making a difference. On the evening of March 20th, I returned to my porch. The sky faded into bruised pinks and soft blues. The lake breathed calmly against the shore. I tucked the blanket tighter around me, feeling the chill of approaching night. My scars pulsed not with pain, but with memory. They would always be part of me. But they weren't chains anymore. They were proof that I survived, that I rebuilt, that I moved forward. Tracing the rim of my coffee mug, I whispered not a promise, but a simple truth. I carry scars, but I also carry strength and peace. I lifted my eyes to the last light clinging to the horizon. The past shaped me, but it doesn't define me. I write my own ending now. Before we close today, I just want to say this not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who's walked through the fire and come out stronger. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, kindness, and showing up when it matters, not when it's convenient. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most teach us the hardest lessons about love, about boundaries, about self-worth, about survival. If you're carrying scars from your own battles, know this. Scars mean you healed. They don't make you weak. They prove you survived what was meant to break you. You have every right to choose peace. You have every right to protect your heart, your home, and your dreams, even if it means standing alone for a while. And trust me, standing alone in your truth will always be better than standing with people who only love the version of you they can control. What about you? Have you ever had to make a hard choice between keeping your peace and pleasing others? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, type 1 in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Tell me what you think and where you're tuning in from. And if you want more real, raw, powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. Stay strong, stay true, and most of all, stay free.